Welcome, everybody. My name is Larry Jordan. What I want to spend the next half hour doing is talking about the Blackmagic camera. Now, you will notice, those of you who are close to the front row, that there is no Blackmagic camera here. And the reason is, you can see it in the Blackmagic booth, which is over at stand F24. They've got it all set up. You can get your hands on it and play with it, which we couldn't do here. What I want to do today is I want to talk about the process of using the Blackmagic camera, give you some samples of what footage looks like, give you some pluses and minuses so you can decide for yourself whether the Blackmagic camera makes sense for the kind of shooting that you want to do. Blackmagic design enjoys disrupting the markets. I got a sneak peek of the Blackmagic cinema camera 2 days before it was announced at NAB last year, and it took all the air out of a very large trade show. The only thing people were talking about is the fact that Blackmagic Design had released a camera, and not just a camera, a high-definition camera at a price point less than $3,000 US. There's a reason Blackmagic Design calls this the cinema camera. It has a very short, what's called very narrow depth of field, combined with up to 13 stops of dynamic range. It has an image which looks very filmic. However, these same features work against the documentary filmmaker that wants to quickly grab a shot and move on. It's not a run-and-gun camera. It's also not a camera that you want to use handheld. You want to use it on a tripod. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But before we talk about the specifics of using the camera, I want to give you an example of what this camera can do. This is a piece of footage that was shot called A Night at 9 Elms, and I want you to look at a couple things. It's going to run about 3 minutes. Look at how well it handles extremes of light and dark, which emphasizes its 13 stops of dynamic range. Look at the narrow depth of field, how very little of the frame is in focus. And look at its ability to handle large areas of low light without a lot of video noise. This is 9 Elms. The film was directed and shot by James Tonkin. What impresses me about it is the texture the camera is able to maintain in the shadows, the richness of detail, and the fact that we've got such great exposure latitude when you're shooting in extreme conditions of light and dark. What I want to talk about for the next 20 minutes is information you could use in using the camera. Not only its specifications and video formats, but why you would select the video format that it shoots, additional gear that you're going to need, 2 sample workflows of working with the camera, some additional things you need to know, as well as a couple of statements about audio quality. It has a 15 by 8 millimeter sensor. It's roughly the same size as a 16 millimeter film frame, for those of you old enough to remember what 16 millimeter film actually looks like. It natively shoots 2400 by 2432 horizontal and 1366 pixels native. If you're shooting in Cinema DMG format, it shoots at 2400 by 1350 actual frame. It shoots Cinema DMG ProRes 422 HQ and DNX HD formats. ProRes and DNX HD are downsampled to 1920 1080. It has 13 stops of dynamic range, which is the distance between the darkest and the lightest aspect inside the image. It supports both EF and MFT lens mounts. The 2 cameras are exactly the same, but because the camera body is machined aluminum, they need to machine the aluminum differently for an EF mount versus an MFT mount. It has a back monitor of 800 by 480 pixels with extremely easy to read menus for those of you that have had to squint at camera menus with fonts that are too small to read. It is not light. It's 3.75 pounds, 1.7 kilograms. It shoots 2 principal video formats, well 3 actually, Cinema DMG and ProRes or DNX HD. Cinema DMG is actually a bundle of frames. Each individual image is a separate file. It's a DMG file. They're stored in a folder, so what you end up with is an image sequence of frames. Each frame is 12-bit RAW, 2400 by 1350, and it's shot in a log basis, which means it comes out looking very milky. Nothing is very dark, nothing is very white. It absolutely requires color correction later. The second is a video format that can be your choice of ProRes or DNX HD. Switching between Cinema DMG and ProRes is as easy as throwing a switch. You can record one scene, Cinema DMG, change the menu on the same SSD. You can record ProRes on the same SSD. You can record DNX HD. When you're working in DNX HD or ProRes, you're limited by the bit depth of the format itself. Both of them are 10-bit formats. Both of them are YUV formats. Both of them are 422 chroma subsampled formats. You can have a choice of video which applies a color lookup table called a LUT. That color lookup table makes the video look good enough that you don't need to go through color correction. You can, but you don't need to. When you switch it to a film, the film look, the film records in what's very similar to an RE log C. Again, it's got washed out shadows, it's got pulled down highlights, and the log C format, the film look, is going to guarantee that you have to go to color correction. You'll color correct any of the formats, but the video format is designed to minimize the amount of time you need to spend in post-production making your images look good. For those of you that want to tweak and make your images look as good as possible, you want to shoot in Cinema DMG because that gives you the widest latitude, the greatest range of colors for your color correction. In ProRes and DNX HD, you're shooting a movie file, a clip, which is a single file. With Cinema DMG, you've got a folder which has images in it. As an added benefit, Blackmagic includes the full version of DaVinci Resolve with the camera. This allows you to use DaVinci for your final color grade in the editing process, so you don't have to edit and color correct inside Final Cut or inside Avid. DaVinci Resolve can create your final output, or it can color correct individual clips, so you can then bring those individual color corrected clips back into your NLE because you haven't finished making your editing decisions. When you are shooting Cinema DMG, and by the way, Final Cut 10 and Avid both have problems playing Cinema DMG files natively. They would prefer to have them converted to a movie file. Cinema DMG requires a data rate of 165 megabytes a second. This is faster than all FireWire attached devices, and it's faster than a single drive can support. So if you're working with Cinema DMG, it needs to be connected via fiber channel or Thunderbolt or USB 3, and it needs to be at least a 3-drive RAID to be able to support the data transfer needs of that format. If you need to store an hour of Cinema DMG, it's 600 gigabytes to store an hour. Because the camera records directly to consumer-level SSD cards, a 250 gig SSD card is going to record about 25 minutes of material. Think of it as a film magazine where you can record up to 20 to 25 minutes. At that point, you pull the SSD drive out, you put in a new SSD drive, and you can continue recording. If, on the other hand, you switch to ProRes 422HQ, that's 27.5 megabytes per second, which can be handled by a FireWire device. It requires 1.65 gigabytes per minute to store, 99 gigabytes per hour, and an SSD drive that stores 250 gigabytes will record for about 2.5 hours before you run out of space. Clearly, there's a trade-off. When you are recording at the highest level of quality, which is Cinema DMG, you get far less recording time than when you're recording at ProRes. Just by comparison, if you were recording Red RAW at 7:1 compression, that's about 4 gigabytes a minute, which is in between Cinema DMG and ProRes. You are going to need some additional gear. The camera comes with the camera, comes with a power supply, comes with all the necessary software, does not come with a lens. So first you're going to need a lens, either lenses that work with EF or MFT mounts. Then you need a tripod. This is not a handheld camera. It's not designed ergonomically like a DSLR camera is to fit comfortably in your hand. It fits very uncomfortably in your hand, and it's got a strong forward tilt. It keeps wanting to tilt down as you hold it. Or you can get a shooting rig with handles on it so you can deal with it either as a shoulder mount, but you're going to need some external hardware. You cannot handhold this camera. You're also going to need external audio gear. The built-in mic on the camera only records a mono signal. You can record by plugging directly into the camera. It has a tip ring sleeve. It's a mini tip ring sleeve, but you can deal with XLR output, and you've got all the shielding that XLR provides, but you're going to need some external gear to record. It requires an external battery. The internal battery cannot be replaced, cannot be taken out, cannot be increased. Instead, you want to get an external battery from Switronics or from Anton Bauer. It does support HD SDI out, so you could monitor in your own video village, take the SDI out of the camera, feed it to a monitor. SDI, as you know, handles both audio out, video out, and timecode, so you can feed timecode to a monitor that's able to display the timecode field, and your script supervisor or your production assistant that's doing logging can log the timecode on the camera as it's being shot. You'll also need a computer to capture the media. You cannot format SSD drives with the camera. So the SSD drives need to be formatted HFS Plus. They need to be formatted on a Mac. They need to then, once they're formatted, you bring them over to the camera, you shoot the drive, bring the drive back to your computer. Now there's a very neat little sled the Seagate has got. It's just a little drive dock. The drive slides onto this sled. There's a Thunderbolt cable coming out the back of it, and you can connect the SSD to the sled. The sled then connects into the computer. You don't need fancy gear to store the SSD drive, and just check with Seagate. I've been told that it's relatively inexpensive, but I have forgotten the price. There's two ways that we can work with the camera. One is a simple workflow. This was developed by a gentleman locally called Frank Glencarn. And that's to shoot ProRes 422HQ or shoot DNX HD. Use the video option with the baked in, which means you can't change LUT. LUT stands for lookup table, the way that we map colors from a log space into the space that our eye is used to seeing. You can use no color correction with the video, or the film option, which records similar to log C, which does require color correction. You shoot it with the camera, bring the SSD, import the footage into your nonlinear editor, edit, color correct, and then you're done. Just export the finished program. The benefit is the workflow is fast. It has reduced file sizes. It has a more limited color grade. You can't do all kinds of interesting things with color correction and the camera. Or you've got an uncompressed workflow. This is going to require a lot more storage, takes a bit more time. You shoot the 12-bit Cinema DNG RAW file. you copy from the SSD and create low-res proxies. So you create a proxy file from the Cinema DNG, and then you edit the proxies, export to DaVinci Resolve, let DaVinci Resolve go back to the high-def version, the master file. Then you switch back, as I said, to the DNG file, do your color grade on the camera originals, export the color grade as a single movie file, because Resolve does not support audio. You bring that movie file back fully color graded into the NLE of your choice, and you output. This process is slower, has more steps, creates much larger files, but you've got an almost unlimited palette for what you want your colors to look like, because you're working in a 12-bit space. Essentially, you can create any look that you want. So there are some things you need to know. This is a camera that's specifically designed for limited depth of field. If you want stuff which is focused way deep, this is not the camera. It's probably not the camera for extensive 3D work, because for 3D to look good, you want to have as much depth of field as possible. You can't erase the SSD drives in the camera. They have to be formatted on a Mac. It needs to be a Mac because it has to be HFS Plus in formatting. These are consumer-grade SSDs. They're delicate. You want to store them in static bags. You want to keep the contacts clean. You don't want to toss them about because they aren't going to be that rugged. And oh, by the way, if an SSD slows down, because there are a limited number of reads and a limited number of writes you can do to an SSD. It's not just unlimited. The way you get it back to factory defaults is you put it in your Mac and you reformat it, but you do a secure delete or secure erase. It takes several hours to get done, but basically it wipes out all of the accumulated overhead of the SSD and resets it back to its factory defaults. This could, for instance, take an SSD and do it overnight, and you could have that as it's, you don't do this every time, you just erase it most of the time. But as performance starts to slow down, then you just simply do a secure erase and you've got it back to its factory speed. Remember that your system is only as fast as your storage I/O. If you've got a bunch of FireWire attached drives, you're not going to be able to use the Cinema DMG format because it's just going to be too big. If you compare it to HD files like AVC HD, you're going to be working with much larger files. You're going to need to have massive amounts of storage available to you. And both Final Cut 10 and Premiere Pro have problems playing Cinema DNG files in real time. They much prefer to play a movie file. Also a note about audio. Audio is saved by the camera in a broadcast wave format. One of the benefits of broadcast wave is it has the potential to store timecode information as well as audio information. You can record audio direct to the camera, but as opposed to using double system, you can use double system and sync it up later within the editing program. But it's just as easy to take and record audio into, say, a sound devices or a Tascam portable amplifier, bring that in using just a tip ring sleeve to a mini plug, and this avoids the sync problems that you would have for matching double system sound. Audio level bracketing is always a good idea, where you're recording one channel at, say, 0 dB or -3 or -6, wherever you want to be, and the other one 3 to 6 dB lower. So in the event some loud event occurs, you can switch to the lower track and you don't have to worry about distortion. However, the brackets need to be created in your mixer. They cannot be created automatically in the camera. If you use the menu on the back of the camera to adjust audio levels while you're recording, the audio level adjustment will put a click in the audio track. So you want to leave the audio settings on the camera alone during the record process and adjust the audio on your mixer, the external device. Sound Devices and Juiced Link are two companies that provide really excellent quality. They can be fed into the camera, and both these companies are here at the show. The Blackmagic Design Company is an industry leader in shaking up industries. They continue to do so with the cinema camera. At US $29.95, it has the price of a DSLR camera with the performance to equal cameras that cost twice as much. If you're looking for a low-cost, high-quality camera that equals the depth of field and image quality of DSLR cameras while providing the recording length and the more traditional film or video workflows that we're used to, the Blackmagic Design cinema camera needs to be on your short list of cameras to be considered. Blackmagic asked me to give this presentation to you today because I think it's a camera that can work well with most nonlinear editors, whether it's Premiere or Avid or Final Cut Pro 7 or Final Cut Pro 10. It's the only camera that gives us the ability of switching between ProRes and DNx HD and Cinema DMG files. We can see it by going to the Blackmagic booth, which is F24. It's right in the middle of the hall. They've got a camera set up. You're able to take a look at it, shoot your own footage, and see what it looks like. But it's definitely something that you want to consider. For more information, for people that want to take a look at the camera, you can visit blackmagicdesign.com. My name is Larry Jordan, and thank you very much.